Forget everything Hollywood showed you about Cleopatra. The beautiful queen seducing powerful men. The golden palaces. Elizabeth Taylor's perfect makeup. Pure fantasy. The real Cleopatra was something far darker, far more dangerous, and far more fascinating. Ancient papyrus records, Roman war documents, and Egyptian tomb inscriptions reveal details the movies never dared to show. Discover 15 disturbing secrets that will completely change how you see history's most misunderstood woman. Subscribe to our channel and give our videos some hype to help us out. Forget the dark eyeliner and Egyptian goddess image. Cleopatra VII was not Egyptian by blood, not even close. She was pure Macedonian Greek, a direct descendant of Ptolemy I, one of Alexander the Great's generals who seized Egypt after Alexander died in 323 BC. Her family had ruled Egypt for nearly 300 years, and in all that time, not a single ruler before her had bothered to learn the Egyptian language. They ruled a country whose people they refused to even speak to. Here's the disturbing part Hollywood never shows. The real Cleopatra looked nothing like Elizabeth Taylor. Ancient Roman coins minted during her actual lifetime show a woman with a sharp, hooked nose, a strong jaw, and a prominent forehead. Not the soft Hollywood beauty. Not the perfect symmetry. Scholars at Cambridge who studied these coins described her appearance as striking but unconventional. The entire image of Cleopatra as an exotic Egyptian goddess was manufactured, first by her own propaganda machine, then completed by Hollywood 2,000 years later. Picture this. You've just taken the throne. Your own family is your biggest threat. What do? Cleopatra didn't hesitate. She eliminated them. First came her brother Ptolemy XIII, who was just 10 years old when he was used as a political weapon against her. After Caesar helped her defeat him in 47 BC, Ptolemy XIII conveniently drowned in the Nile during the retreat. Ancient sources say it wasn't an accident. Cleopatra made sure of it. But she wasn't done. Her younger sister Arsinoe IV had the nerve to declare herself Queen of Egypt while Cleopatra was busy with Caesar. Cleopatra never forgot that. Years later, she convinced Mark Antony to have Arsinoe dragged out of her sanctuary at the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus and executed on the temple steps in front of horrified worshippers. Killing someone inside a sacred temple was considered one of the worst crimes in the ancient world. Cleopatra did it anyway. This wasn't a woman who forgave family betrayal. This was a woman who deleted threats permanently, blood or not. Think about it. Every powerful ruler needs a brand. Cleopatra's brand was irresistible beauty, and she manufactured it from scratch. Ancient historian Plutarch, who wrote about her nearly 100 years after her death, was very specific. He said her beauty was not altogether incomparable. His actual words, not stunning, not breathtaking. He said the real power was her voice, which he described like a musical instrument with many strings. She could switch languages mid-conversation and make anyone feel like they were the most important person in the room. The coins tell the real story. In 2007, researchers at the University of Newcastle studied authentic coins from her era and found features that Hollywood would never cast as a leading lady. Ancient writers focused obsessively on her intelligence, her charm, and her voice, almost never on her physical appearance. Yet somehow, 2,000 years later, we remember her as one of history's great beauties. That's not history. That's the most successful rebranding operation the ancient world ever produced, and Cleopatra herself designed every inch of it. Here's a detail that will make you deeply uncomfortable. Cleopatra ran what historians now describe as an actual human experimentation program. She was obsessed with poisons and their effects, not in a theoretical way, but in a hands-on, clinical way. Ancient sources, including the physician Galen, reference her personal research into the speed and pain levels of different toxic substances. She needed to know which poison was fastest, which was most painful, and which left the least visible evidence. The test subjects were not volunteers. Condemned prisoners were brought to her and given different poisons while observers recorded how long death took and what the symptoms looked like. She reportedly rejected several methods as too slow or too violent before identifying her preferred options. Some historians believe this research directly informed her own death, that she spent years essentially preparing the perfect exit strategy. The Woman Hollywood shows you crying over Mark Antony was simultaneously running one of the ancient world's most methodical death research programs. Imagine being smuggled inside a rolled carpet, carried through enemy lines, and delivered directly to the most powerful military commander in the world, and pulling it off perfectly. That's exactly what Cleopatra did in 48 BC. She was 21 years old, exiled from her own palace by her brother's forces, and completely cut off from Caesar. So she had herself rolled inside a linen sack, some accounts say a carpet, and delivered to Caesar's private quarters at the royal palace in Alexandria. What happened next was not romance. It was a masterclass in political survival. Caesar was 52 years old, the most powerful man alive, and the only person who could restore her to power. Cleopatra gave him exactly what he needed, a legitimate reason to interfere in Egypt's civil war. She offered him alliance, resources, and political cover. Caesar gave her his legions and his protection. Ancient Roman senators back home were furious, not because of the romance, but because they saw clearly what Cleopatra was doing, using Caesar as a weapon. She was 21 years old, and she was outmaneuvering Rome's greatest general without picking up a single sword. When Cleopatra sailed to meet Mark Antony at Tarsus in 41 BC, she didn't just show up. She engineered an entrance that people talked about for generations. Plutarch describes how she had the sails of her ship soaked in rare perfumes, expensive kifi, and exotic blends that ancient Egyptians used in religious ceremonies. The wind carried the scent to the shore long before her ship was even visible. People on the docks smelled something otherworldly approaching before they saw anything. This wasn't vanity. This was calculated psychological warfare. Antony was waiting on his throne on the shore, expecting a diplomatic meeting. Instead, Cleopatra transformed his simple political summit into a full sensory experience. The smell, the gold-covered ship, the theatrical presentation. By the time she actually appeared, Antony was already operating on a subconscious level she had carefully engineered. Modern behavioral psychologists call this environmental priming, controlling someone's emotional state through sensory manipulation before a negotiation even begins. Cleopatra was doing it 2,000 years before the research existed. Here's a number that puts everything in perspective. 9 languages. Cleopatra spoke Egyptian, Ethiopian, Hebrew, Arabic, Aramaic, Parthian, Latin, the Median language, and of course Greek, her native tongue. No ruler of her dynasty had ever spoken Egyptian before her. For 275 years, the Ptolemaic rulers communicated with their own subjects through translators. Cleopatra looked at that and saw a massive political vulnerability, so she fixed it. Ancient historian Plutarch specifically noted that she was the first of her family to speak directly with Egyptians, Ethiopians, and other subject peoples without an interpreter. The effect was immediate and powerful. To people who had never heard their rulers speak their language, it felt like a miracle. Priests, merchants, soldiers, all of them suddenly had a queen who spoke to them directly. In a world where legitimacy came from divine connection, speaking someone's language was the closest thing to proof that the gods were on your side. While her ancestors built walls between themselves and their subjects, Cleopatra built bridges, and then used those bridges to cement absolute loyalty. Everyone knows the story. Cleopatra, heartbroken after Antony's death, pressed an asp, an Egyptian cobra, to her breast and died. It's one of history's most famous scenes. There's just one massive problem. There is almost no credible physical evidence that it actually happened. The asp story comes almost entirely from Roman sources written after her death, sources that had every political reason to craft a dramatic, controllable ending for Egypt's last queen. Ancient physician Plutarch noted that no snake was ever found in her tomb. Guards outside reported hearing nothing. Her body showed only 2 small marks on her arm. But toxicologists today point out that a cobra bite would have caused severe visible swelling and violent convulsions, not the peaceful death ancient accounts describe. Some historians now believe Octavian, the Roman leader who captured Alexandria, had her quietly poisoned and then staged the snake story because a dramatic suicide was far better propaganda than Rome executing a queen. A dead Cleopatra who chose death on her own terms was less dangerous than a murdered Cleopatra who became a martyr. Cleopatra had 4 children, 1 with Caesar, Caesarion, and 3 with Mark Antony. twins Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, and a younger son named Ptolemy Philadelphus. When Rome won and Cleopatra died, these children became Rome's problem, and Rome's solution was brutal and efficient. Caesar Ion, at just 17 years old, was hunted down and executed on Octavian's direct orders. Octavian's advisor reportedly told him simply, "Two Caesars is one too many." The boy was strangled. The three younger children were taken to Rome and paraded through the streets in golden chains during Octavian's triumph, a public humiliation designed to show the Roman people that Egypt was finished. After that public display, Alexander Helios and Ptolemy Philadelphus simply vanished from all historical records. No death notice, no further mention, just gone. Only Cleopatra Selene survived. She was eventually married off to a North African king as a political tool. 3 of Cleopatra's 4 children were erased from history as efficiently as Rome erased their mother's kingdom. Hollywood never shows you the children, because that part of the story has no comfortable ending. Picture this. You are a Greek woman ruling an Egyptian population that has no particular reason to accept you. How do you manufacture legitimacy from nothing? Cleopatra's answer was one of history's first and most sophisticated personal branding campaigns. She officially positioned herself as the living incarnation of Isis, Egypt's most powerful and beloved goddess. This wasn't casual symbolism. It was a total identity transformation backed by the full power of the state. She had herself depicted in temple carvings in traditional Egyptian goddess clothing. She performed religious rituals publicly in ways no Ptolemaic ruler had ever done. She adopted Egyptian religious titles. She made appearances at major festivals dressed as Isis herself. For ordinary Egyptians who had lived under foreign Greek rulers for generations, suddenly seeing their queen dressed as their most sacred goddess, speaking their language, performing their rituals, was electrifying. Temples across Egypt began incorporating her image alongside actual deities. 2,000 years before social media, Cleopatra understood that controlling your image means controlling what people believe about you. And she controlled it completely. Here's what ancient documents actually show about the great love story of Cleopatra and Mark Antony. In 41 BC, Cleopatra needed military protection. Rome's civil wars had left Egypt dangerously exposed, and her position as queen was not secure. Mark Antony needed money, enormous amounts of it, to fund his military campaigns against Parthia in the east. Both of them needed exactly what the other had. The love affair began at their very first meeting, which Cleopatra again staged with theatrical precision. Roman historian Appian and others who studied the actual correspondence between them describe a relationship that was always tangled with military strategy, resource negotiation, and political survival. When Antony needed funding for his Parthian campaign, Cleopatra provided it. In exchange for territorial expansions that gave Egypt back lands it had lost generations earlier. She was essentially buying back Egyptian territory using Antony as the military mechanism. Did real feelings develop over time? Possibly. Ancient sources suggest genuine connection in their final days. But the foundation was never romance. It was the oldest transaction in politics. I have what you need, you have what I need, let's make a deal. To fund her political survival, the alliances with Caesar, the campaigns with Antony, the constant military expenses of keeping Egypt independent, Cleopatra needed money on a scale that even Egypt's famous wealth struggled to provide. Her solution was ruthless. Ancient financial records and temple inscriptions document systematic raids on Egypt's sacred temples. Gold offerings, sacred vessels, ritual treasures accumulated over centuries, stripped out and melted down for military funding. The temples of Egypt were not just religious sites. They were the economic and social backbone of entire communities. Priests managed local economies, provided food during famines, and maintained the social order. When Cleopatra emptied their treasuries, she wasn't just taking gold. She was destabilizing the very institutions that kept Egyptian society functioning. Ordinary Egyptians who had celebrated her as a goddess queen watched sacred objects disappear into the war machine. Some temple records from the period show gaps in ritual activities that historians interpret as evidence of economic disruption caused directly by royal confiscation. She was simultaneously the goddess Isis and the woman stripping Isis's temples bare. The Roman Senate's propaganda campaign against Cleopatra is one of the most revealing things in ancient history, because you don't build a massive propaganda machine against someone who doesn't scare you. Octavian's war against Antony was officially declared not against Antony himself, but against Cleopatra. Roman law required a foreign enemy to declare war on. Octavian chose her specifically because she terrified the Roman establishment in ways they could barely articulate. Roman writers called her a whore, a sorceress, a drunken oriental queen who had bewitched Rome's greatest general. Cicero, who met her personally in Rome, described her with open contempt and hostility. But strip away the insults, and what you find underneath is fear. Fear of a woman who had successfully manipulated two of Rome's most powerful men, who controlled Egypt's grain supply that fed a significant portion of the Roman world, and who was raising children who had legitimate claims to Roman power. The propaganda wasn't about morality. It was about containing something Rome's Senate genuinely did not know how to defeat through normal political means. The moment Cleopatra died in August of 30 BC, something irreversible happened. 3,000 years of continuous Egyptian civilization, the pharaohs, the temples, the sacred traditions, the unbroken line of rulers stretching back to 3100 BC, ended permanently. Not gradually, not slowly, immediately. Octavian declared Egypt a Roman province and installed a Roman prefect to govern it. No more Egyptian rulers. No more pharaonic tradition. The last link in a chain 3 millennia long was cut in a single afternoon. Egypt was treated differently from every other Roman province. It was so valuable, so strategically critical as Rome's primary grain supplier, that Octavian made it his personal property rather than a Senate-controlled province. Roman senators were not even allowed to visit Egypt without the emperor's personal permission. The country that had outlasted every empire of the ancient world, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, survived them all and then ceased to exist as an independent entity the moment its last queen died. Hollywood shows you Cleopatra's death as a personal tragedy. It was actually the end of an entire civilization. Here is the most disturbing secret of all. Almost everything we think we know about Cleopatra comes from Roman sources, written by the people who defeated her, erased her kingdom, and had every political reason to control her story. The ancient historians we rely on most, Plutarch, Cassius Dio, Appian, all wrote decades or centuries after her death, drawing from Roman accounts that were themselves filtered through Octavian's propaganda apparatus. Egypt's own records, papyri, temple inscriptions, administrative documents, tell fragments of a different story, but most were never translated or studied until the modern era. Cleopatra almost certainly left her own written records. She was documented as a scholar who wrote treatises on medicine, alchemy, and gynecology. None of those writings survive. The Library of Alexandria, which she had access to and helped maintain, was eventually destroyed. What we are left with is the version of Cleopatra that Rome wanted us to have, the dangerous seductress, the foreign threat, the cautionary tale. The actual woman, the 9-language polyglot, the political genius, the scientist, the last defender of a 3,000-year civilization, was buried under 2,000 years of someone else's storytelling. History's most dangerous woman wasn't dangerous because of her beauty. She was dangerous because nobody saw her real moves coming. Not Caesar, not Antony, not Rome. And 2,000 years later, Hollywood still doesn't want you to know the truth, because the real Cleopatra doesn't need a love story to be extraordinary. She just needs the facts. Comment below, which secret shocked you the most? And if Hollywood made a movie about the real Cleopatra, would you watch it?